Good morning, Tribunal members. What a great honor to stand on the lands of the Algonquin Nation and to have this the very sacred conversation blessed by the elder this morning. This very country is named Canada. It's a gift of First Nations peoples to their land and to all Canadians. And it means village. But for far too long, there's been two villages in this great nation. One for all other children, and one for the First Nations children who have called this land home for thousands of years. Children are the keepers of the possible, and they're also experts in love and fairness. And they are the ones who often call us up to be better people than who we thought we could be, and a better country than we think we are. This case, this moment, is for the children. Over the next coming weeks, there'll be lots of legal arguments. But the thing that's most important is that you decide this case for the children themselves, for what's best for them, not what's best for the caring society and not what's best for the government. Because if you decide what's best for the children, you'll make the best decision for us all. This case strikes to the conscience of the nation. It asks a fundamental question of Canadians when they sing that song, "O Canada, we stand on guard for thee." Are they really thinking that they're standing on guard for the government of Canada as a matter of public policy to say to a child, no, you get less, or hold on, you don't get that service at all because of your race or because of your national ethnic origin? Things that you cannot change and should not be asked to change in a wealthy nation such as ours. This moment is dedicated to the children, the ones separated from their families and placed in residential schools. And as we heard last week, thousands of them never came home. And to the thousands who are still searching for their childhoods that were lost there. And to the parents who grew up in communities and First Nations communities all over this country where there were no children because the government of Canada had taken them away. Imagine living in a community where there are no children. This is a case dedicated to children like Jordan River Anderson from the Norway House Cree Nation. A little baby born and just wanting to grow up someplace else than a hospital. He was born with complex medical needs, and he was staying in hospital. And when just shortly after his second birthday, when doctors said he could go home, he would have gone home had he been a non-Aboriginal child. But because he was First Nations, and because our government failed to put the interests of a child ahead of their own, he remained in hospital for over 2 years unnecessarily, and sadly, tragically died there. This case is for his father, Ernest Anderson, who, after enduring the grief of the loss of his son, rallied his family and his nation and his community members to say, please don't let this happen to another child anywhere in the country, and we knew it was. Because in a study that the respondent commissioned, we found 393 other children being told, no, hold on, you don't get that service, or you get less, or you have to wait longer, or you have more hoops to jump, just because they're a First Nations child. I remember the night well. It was December 12th, 2007. We found ourselves in the sacred house of the Government of Canada, the Parliament of Canada. It was in the evening, and the motion in support of Jordan's principle was about to be voted on. It was dark up in the gallery, and I looked over to my left, and I could see Ernest Anderson sitting there. I wondered what he could be thinking at this moment. The light shone brightly on his face, and I saw him glancing to the people below, the members of Parliament whose job it is to stand on guard for all of us and, most importantly, for the children. And when the motion came to be voted on, each member stood and they voted in the affirmative. It did not matter what political party they were from. But unlike in normal tradition, they did not sit, they remained rise. They could not find their seats at a moment when the Spirit and the children were calling them to rise and be a better country than what they had been. And then there was the applause from all who had voted in yes and none who had voted against. And Ernest Anderson said on that day, "Do not let the good that was done in my son's name just be a moral victory." And as the evidence will show, the government has done everything but honor the legacy of that child, even though they so directly contributed to the derision of his life. This case is also for Shannon Kustachin, a girl I knew personally, a girl who is one of my heroes and a great national hero, a girl who for the first 15 years of her life fought just to get proper schools in this country because they're so underfunded. You see, the echoes of what you hear in child welfare, they echo across all other areas of children's experience. The government of Canada, as you know, and as the legal record shows, from the moment this case is filed, has been trying to get it dismissed on jurisdictional grounds. Jurisdictional grounds that make no difference in the lives of children. And so it was with Shannon that during the time when this case was going on, she was showing up in Parliament, and she said to the minister there, "I will never give up because school's a time for dreams and every kid deserves it." She was fighting for something that all other Canadian children take for granted. And on one of those motions of dismiss in this very room, in June of 2009, brought by the respondent, just the night before, we lost Shannon Kustachin on a highway. She died never knowing what it was to be treated equally by her own country. It's for all the children who are in foster care right now and the ones who grew up there, including a woman who wrote this morning. She said, "I still remember the days I spent in foster care. Too many homes for a small child to endure. Here I am at 58 and moving forward, and all I can say at this point is that I am grateful for this upcoming hearing. This is a day for non-Aboriginal children too, and for their families. You know, it's a day for anyone who believes that a child should grow up in their family home. It's something that most of us take for granted. Home shapes us. It's a place where our grandparents were. It's a place where stories and our languages and our cultures were said for millennia. It comforts us. It teaches us, and it helps us to remember where we come from and who we are meant to be. It's a place of favorite teddy bears, like Jordan. His favorite was a blue teddy bear. Of hearing stories of the day you were born, and of the ceremonies that bring people together in common value, community, family, and relationship. It's a time when baby books fill up with the memories and the loving notes of all those who know that child and know how special and sacred they are. And it's a place where we form the stories that we'll tell our own children when they ask, "What was it like when you grew up?" And if you're my nephew, he'll ask me that question, and he said, "Were dinosaurs still alive?" And I said, "No, but they were when your Uncle Mike was around, so ask him." This basic and important part of being a human being is something too many First Nations children have been denied by the Government of Canada. First in residential schools, and now through the compound hardship of flawed and inequitable child and family services. And in all of the government's arguments so far, what troubles me the most is they've not made one argument that what they're doing is in the best interest of children. Why does it matter to children if they can be compared to someone else when they're getting less? Why does it matter if it's a service if they're getting less? The Government of Canada must do what all other Canadians do as a part of moral course. We put our children first, and we don't talk about all the things that we have done in defense of those things that we have yet to do. A woman in foster care talked to me recently. You see, I think it's important that we say here that there are some children that need to be removed from their families because of safety in their homes, but not at the overrepresented rates we see now for First Nations children. They're more likely to be removed at 6 to 8 times the rate for reasons that we can prevent: poverty, poor housing, and substance misuse. Because growing up in foster care is hard. I think I'm one of the few in this room who has seen that firsthand, who has removed children from their families, who sees the system that we replace these families with. This woman asked me, this former woman who was as a child in foster care, she said to the system, She said, "You promised me a better life and you didn't deliver," because foster care is hard. Most of us as adults, we get nervous if we're even billeted out to a stranger during a sporting event. But imagine that you're 7 years old, that you're removed from your family and the only place that you knew, and you don't even know where you're going to sleep tonight. The social worker, as good and great as they try to work, they're so strained with resources they may not even have an answer. I've seen so many children as I drive them back to the office because I have not a foster home to go to, that they're crying in the back seat and I cannot even turn around to comfort them. I don't know when they'll be going home, and I don't know if what I have to provide them is any better. The residential schools and the mass removals of children in the 60s, called the 60s scoop, it should have taught us all, as the Prime Minister had apologized for in 2008, that the removal of children unnecessarily from their families is something to be stopped. Because too many First Nations children have grown up not knowing the great traditions of their people, not knowing their languages and their cultures. And as we know in a country that celebrates French and English so highly, that children who learn their own first language first are much more fluent in other languages later. For far too many children, tribunal members, for far too many First Nations children, their clearest memory of childhood is the day that they were taken away. Taken away and placed somewhere else. The great story of hope here lies in the way that these issues have been determined all over the world. You see, Canada is not the first country that has said no to a people or hold on, you get less for decades. There are many other examples around the world. And sometimes there's a great leader who rises, someone like Mandela or Martin Luther King or Mahatma Gandhi. The leader who knows that the country can be as good and great as it will, and knows that the defining nature of a people is to treat itself and its children with the respect and honor they deserve. But absent that, then the people themselves must rise. As parents and people who love children, there are times in all families when we have to guide them back to the values that matter the most, to being respectful, to being loving, and to being honorable. In this case, Canada's children are providing guidance to the Government of Canada. They are asking by the thousands that the Government of Canada be called back to the values of equality and fairness and justice. Caitlin, a member of the Gittigan-Zibi First Nation, is one of them. She says, "The reality is in Canada that we are currently facing a crisis with regard to the gap between Canadians and Indigenous peoples in child welfare, and it continues to increase. For Canada, it's not about the lack of funds. They do have the money. It's about the lack of will." Some people will describe this case as complicated. But children are experts in love and fairness, and they see right to the heart of the matter. You see, Canada's children cannot understand why all children in this country cannot expect the government to treat them fairly, why the government would spend over $3 million trying to avoid a day of truth-telling before an independent body such as yourselves. Theory is an elementary school student, and he writes this to the Government of Canada. He says, "You're breaking the laws of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. The convention says that children have a right to be raised by their parents." And Randy, well, he writes this. He says, "I am Randy. I feel disappointed in the government. I think this is a bad idea that the government is doing. I dreamed that this would stop. I hope Canada would be a better place. I demand that First Nations be treated fairly. I am Randy." We filed this case in 2007. I had spent personally over a decade working with the government because, like many Canadians, I believed in the country. I believed that if we proved that the inequality was there jointly with them, if we showed the harms for children, and as Paul Champ has shown, they understand that the harms lead to children being removed from their families and many other families living in unbelievable hardship. but most importantly, if we developed solutions that were evidence-informed, that they would do the right thing. Because again, all parents, all people, expect of one another that when we know better, we'll do better for children. In this case, the government knows better and didn't do better. And during the time when we were sitting at that table, it wasn't people like me who were suffering. The number of First Nations children entering child welfare care between 1995 and 2001 increased a staggering 71.5%. Now that sounds like a big number. But when I hear it, I think of only the little kids that those things represent. You see, together, it meant that they had spent over 2 million nights away from their families, away from their teddy bears, away from their language, and away from their culture. It was February 27, 2007, and we were in the House of Parliament, and we filed this case. People asked me how I felt then, and it was a mixed feeling. I felt sad that we had to bring a case against the government of Canada to get them to treat First Nations children equitably. But I felt proud to stand with all First Nations people who had come before me, and the many non-Aboriginal people who stood with us, to say that in this country, there is no room for discrimination against children, and it is not a legitimate fiscal restraint measure. I walked through the hallway and I could hear the echo of my heels with the silence around me. And as I walked out onto Parliament Hill in a beautiful blue day, there was nobody there. I could have believed in that moment the Canadians didn't care, or maybe they thought the First Nations children deserved less. But I know that not to be true. You see, I believe in the fundamental goodness of people. And I knew that if they understood this inequality, if they understood there were solutions, they would absolutely work to make sure that this never happens again. So we created this campaign called I Am a Witness. It doesn't ask people to take sides, it just asks people to watch. And there are over close to 12,000 people and organizations from all over the world watching what happens in this case because they care about the kids. There are people in this room from as far away as the United States and British Columbia who have come here to watch what children's future is going to be like. People are learning and they're listening. And together they hold the power to ensure that this is the first generation of First Nations children who know what it is to be treated fairly by the Government of Canada. Tribunal members, I know that you're not miracle workers, but you do find yourselves at the foot of history in this moment. Absent a leader, one of the great leaders like Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King, it falls to you. It falls to you to make a decision, to find your way through these legal arguments, but most importantly, it finds a way to your heart and to your spirit to make the best decision for children. The last word I'm going to give to a child. You see, we had prepared a video of children and young people to show to you today as part of our opening statements instead of having someone like me talk. But the Government of Canada said it was inappropriate. So we showed it in the Parliament itself just a couple of weeks ago. And a little boy wrote a letter. My name is Elliot. I'm 12 years old and I'm a student at Summit Alternative School. I've been involved with Shannon's Dream and Have a Heart Day for more than a year, and I'm very pleased to be invited to make a statement for the I Am a Witness video. This has been a very meaningful experience for me. I know I'm very lucky. I have a home and a doctor, and I attend a great school. And when Shannon's Dream was introduced at my school, I became aware that a lot of young people are not quite so lucky. Of course, I knew people lived in poverty. But it was an eye-opening experience for me to learn that this happens here in Canada in our own backyard. I felt this was shocking, and I believe it is actually something that we should be ashamed of. That in the midst of all this wealth, Aboriginal people should live in such catastrophic poverty and the lack of what I think most would agree are pretty fundamental rights. I felt driven to tell people about this, to be a part of this movement, that in saying that this is not right. I believe children can and should have a voice, so I'm here lending my voice and saying this must stop. Tonight's event is called History is Coming. I don't think we often have a chance to be a part of history, but as the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society and the Assembly of First Nations present their case to the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, we can all be there. by their side to show our support and say the federal government must not discriminate against First Nations communities and First Nations children. The tribunal can change that, and by doing so can rectify this disgraceful situation and change the course of Aboriginal peoples in this country. That's history, Elliott says, and it's coming right at us. Tribunal members, in conclusion, I am the first witness, but I am not the first voice. There are thousands of children and adults who have come before me who have tried to call attention to the inequalities of First Nations children experience, both within the government and outside of it. We've tried to call the country to be as good and great as it can be, but it has stumbled and it has struggled. And it continues to resist the equality of First Nations children today. Among those whose voices have spoken before are the First Nations leaders, the elders, the children, and the young people, the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child, the Auditor General of Canada. The time for talking is over. The time for justice for children is now. Whatever the Government of Canada's arguments be, let they call us up to be a great country. And please, whatever you argue, make sure that it makes a difference in the lives of the child, because that is where justice truly is measured, whether or not they get to grow up at home. Thank you very much, tribunal members.